Hey guys, tonight we begin with a fire. Not a raging one. Not the kind that devours forests or keeps empires alive. Number this one, crackles gently in the center of a round, smoky hut, glowing just enough to paint gold onto the inside of your grandmother's cheekbones. She hasn't blinked in 5 minutes, and you're not sure if she's staring at you or something just behind you. She whispers stories in a voice that sounds like dry corn grinding in a wooden bowl. And tonight, she's decided it's time you knew what really listens from the shadows of the Zulu fire. You may think this is just another cozy bedtime tale, but just so we're clear, the moment she lifts that calabash bowl and starts stirring the embers with a carved stick that looks suspiciously like a femur, you've already gone too far to back out. It's fine. Most people only get mildly haunted the first time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you are tuning in from, and what time it is right now for you. I love knowing who's sharing the night with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit cross-legged on a woven mat. Your hands are sticky from honeyed maize, and your legs have gone slightly numb, but you dare not move. The old woman's eyes don't look away, and neither do the fires. She starts without warning. There is a story, she says. That fire remembers who first gave it a name, and it never forgives anyone who gets it wrong. You are pretty sure that's not in the science textbook, but she says it with such conviction that even the smoke pauses. Behind her, gourds hang from the ceiling like sleepy bats, and a faint drumbeat you didn't notice before begins thudding in your chest. She dips her fingers into ash and dots a mark on your forehead. You try not to flinch, so you don't forget, she says. Now listen. The flame flickers. She tells you that the Zulu didn't just use fire. They negotiated with it. According to her, and don't ask her sources. She's older than the idea of sources. Zulu herders once lit fires by whispering into dry grass. No flint, no steel, just the right words spoken at the right time. You think she's joking, but then she adds, fire likes manners. It only comes when invited. You ask her how that works. She tells you about the Impai, Zulu warriors, whose campfires were placed in a circle so they could watch the darkness watching them. That's not paranoia, she says. That's protocol. Then she leans in, lowers her voice and says, but do you know why we really keep fire in the middle? You don't. To keep the old gods out, she says. Not to warm us, but to blind what wants to see us. You suddenly feel colder, even though the flames haven't dimmed. Historically, Zulu homesteads did place fires at the heart of the kraal or enclosure. It wasn't just for cooking. It marked the boundary between the living and the ancestral. When elders passed on, ash from that central hearth was sometimes scattered at their graves. An offering, or a tracking device, depending on who you ask. Even historians, she says, with a chuckle that sounds like dried leaves, still argue whether the fire was sacred because it was in the center, or if we built everything else around it because we feared what it might wander off and do. Right? That sounds reassuring. As you stare into the flames, you start noticing shapes, not mystical ones. Just the kind your mind invents when your eyes get too tired to process reality properly. A lizard flickers across the wall. Somewhere outside, a hyena laughs like it knows something you don't. She taps your shoulder. The real secret, she whispers. Fire tells different stories depending on what wood you feed it. According to her, acacia wood tells stories about warriors and loyalty. Mopane wood, used only during drought years, tells stories about betrayal, and driftwood, she insists should never be burned. Unless you want your ancestors to start gossiping louder than you can sleep through. You laugh. She doesn't. And now, of course, you wonder what kind of wood this fire is burning. But remember, she says, drawing a circle in the dust around the fire. Never, ever, step outside the ring when someone's telling stories. That's when the fire thinks you're leaving the conversation. And if you do, it'll try to finish it without you. There's a long pause. She leans back on her elbows, eyes half closed. You think she's finished. Then she adds one more thing. Some people say the first Zulu fire was stolen from lightning. Others say it was a gift from a jackal who ran too fast and caught a spark in his tail. Then she chuckles again. But I say, it's just a visitor. One that never really leaves. You shift slightly, and the fire shifts with you. The drumbeat outside has stopped. You're not sure when. You wake up before sunrise, but the sky is already humming like it knows something's about to happen. Your legs are still crossed. The fire is down to embers, but you haven't moved all night. Not because you were too tired, but because something about that last sentence she said keeps looping in your brain, it never really leaves. Well, that's fine. You are not scared. Just extra respectful today. You stretch your legs, brush ash off your knees, and follow the scent of wet grass and slightly burnt porridge to the hut's threshold. And then you see it. A footprint, in the damp earth, next to yours, except you only remember standing there alone. And that's how today begins, with a footprint that doesn't belong, and a question your grandmother is already prepared to answer. She doesn't look surprised when you point it out. She just shrugs and says, "Sometimes, the ancestors come back to check your spelling." You're not sure if that's a joke. She doesn't explain further. Instead, she hands you a mug of fermented sorghum and asks if you've ever heard the story of the 13th footprint. You haven't. Good, she says, because most people who do wish they hadn't. You sip slowly. It's sour, thick, and oddly comforting, like drinking history through a straw. 13 is not a bad number here, she says. It's just unfinished. She gestures to the earth. In Zulu tradition, when someone walks across sacred ground, their footprints are counted, not by people, but by the earth. 12 means a journey. 14 means a return. But 13. She pauses. 13 means someone got lost. You look again at the print. It's deeper than yours. Barefoot. The toes pressed like it was waiting. Not walking. She tells you about Umvelinkangi, the Sky Father, who once sent a spirit to deliver messages to the first Zulu queen. But the spirit grew too curious, lingered too long, and left one footprint behind. The queen found it and knew something was watching her that shouldn't be. So she lit 13 fires in a circle and made the sky blink. That's a metaphor, she says. But maybe it's not. You ask what happened to the spirit. Still wandering, she shrugs, trying to find its missing step. Historically, Zulu cosmology is deeply tied to ancestral spirits, or amadlozi. These spirits are not evil, but they are powerful, and they expect proper respect. If someone forgets to acknowledge them, strange things happen, like missing items, or cold spots in a hot room, or footprints where no one walked. She explains that Zulu grandmothers often told children never to sweep at night. Why? Because you might accidentally sweep away a spirit that's trying to visit. And spirits, she adds, don't like being swept out. Academic historians actually debate the origins of that superstition. Some say it was practical, so you don't miss coins or small tools in the dark. Others say it ties to the symbolic act of erasing memory. But, your grandmother says with a knowing smirk, those historians don't live here, the spirits do. She tells you a cold fact, one of those offhand remarks she drops like a stone in a pond. You know the old fig tree at the edge of the kraal? She says. It only grows one new leaf each time someone forgets a promise. That's not botanical science. You are fairly sure, but you also recall that the tree's pretty leafy. She leans in. There was a man, she begins, who saw a 13th footprint right outside his hut. He laughed, mocked the ancestors, and said maybe it was the neighbor's goat. What happened? Well, she says, the goat started talking. You stare. She didn't say much, she adds. Just whispered the man's secrets into the village chief's ear. You ask if that's a real story. She lifts a brow. Does it matter? You glance again at the print. It's gone. Just disappeared. No smudge. No puddle. Just plain, untouched soil. She smiles like that's exactly how it was supposed to go. You ask quietly if she's ever seen the 13th footprint herself. She doesn't answer right away. Then, softly, I've left one. You don't ask more. Instead, she hands you a smooth black stone and says to keep it in your pocket. It'll trick the spirits into thinking you're still asleep. You nod like that, makes perfect sense. And honestly, at this point it kind of does. By nightfall, you're back at the fire. The wind outside sounds like someone slowly brushing long hair. You glance at the doorway, half expecting the footprint to come back and ask for something it forgot. Instead, your grandmother leans toward the flames and says one final thing. Don't worry about what left the footprint, she says. Worry about what was following it. Then she laughs and offers you roasted peanuts like nothing's weird at all. The fire's low again, but your grandmother doesn't seem to notice. She's busy staring into a clay bowl filled with water, swaying gently like she's listening to a rhythm only ancestors can hear. The flames make shadows dance across her face, and for a moment, you wonder if she's asleep with her eyes open. You've seen her do that before. It's unsettling. Then, without turning her head, she says, "Did you hear the drum?" You say no. She smiles. Exactly. This is how she begins the story of the drum that doesn't need to be heard to be felt. The drum that beats only at night. The one that watches, not announces. You swallow hard. She tells you the drum has no owner and never had one. It just is. Zulu warriors called it Isigubu Esingavakali, the silent drum. It traveled with the wind, perched on the backs of cattle, slipped into the dreams of old women, and waited beneath sleeping mats just long enough to whisper strange rhythms into children's ears. And once you heard it, that was it. It never left. You ask if she's serious. She says, you think your heartbeat is your own. Now you are not sure. Historically, drums played a massive role in Zulu culture, used in ceremonies, rituals, dances, even messages across distance. But your grandmother insists there were some drums never carved by human hands. Ones made from forgotten animal skin and stories that refuse to die. Real drums, she says, have voices. But that drum, it has a memory. Then she leans forward and tells you about the man who tried to out-drum the silent drum. His name, she says, is unimportant. His ego very much so. He made a drum as wide as a hippo's belly and beat it from dusk till dawn every day. For 13 nights, she says. He wanted the spirits to hear him. They did, but they didn't send applause. They sent another drum. No one saw it arrive, but everyone heard the air change. Birds stopped flying, goats lay down, babies refused to blink. And from the edge of the village, just past the last homestead, came a rhythm, not loud, but felt like someone knocking on your bones. People say the wind shifted in time with it, she says. That pregnant women gave birth early. That ancestors started showing up in dreams, asking if they could please change the beat. You laugh. She doesn't. But the worst part, she continues, was the silence between the beats, that space. It was like it knew when you were thinking. You ask what happened to the man, she tilts her head. He stopped drumming, she says. But the other drum didn't, according to her. He started hearing it everywhere. In river ripples, termite mounds, mango pits. Eventually, he tried to bury his own drum, but the earth refused, just spat it back up. That's how you know, she says. A rejected drum. It means you asked questions the ancestors weren't ready to answer. You shiver a little, even though the fire is warm. Then, as she stirs the ash absently, with a twig shaped like a lightning bolt, she says something else. Do you remember when you had that fever last year? You nod. You mumbled a rhythm for 3 nights straight, she says. And the fire kept beating in time with your breath. You stare at her. She smiles again. Not kindly. Knowingly. Drums aren't always instruments, she whispers. Sometimes. They're warnings. And sometimes, they're invitations. Then she nods toward the corner of the hut. You see that little round object under the goat hide mat. You do. It's a drum, small carved, wrapped in what looks like, please no, woven hair. You ask if it's hers. She chuckles. It's not mine, she says, but it sleeps here, like you. At this point, you regret asking any questions. She lifts it. Gently, like she's holding something still breathing. Then she taps it once. Not a sound. But your chest tightens. Twice. Still nothing. But your left foot taps the floor involuntarily. 3 times. Nothing. And then, from outside the hut, a distant drum answers. You don't want to look out the door. Your grandmother shrugs, places the drum back under the mat and mutters, rude thing, always interrupting my stories. She pours water onto the fire. Steam rises like the ancestors are sighing. And as the hut fills with a thick, soft mist, she says, the historians still argue whether our drums were just musical or magical. She leans in one final time. But none of them can explain why the air goes quiet when you mention this one. You're too afraid to ask if she just tapped it again. You don't hear it this time. But your bones. They're definitely listening. You've just gotten used to sleeping with one eye open and a drum under your floor mat when your grandmother decides it's time for a walk. Not a normal one. Not a let's get some fresh air type of stroll. No. This one starts at dusk, ends at somewhere unmarked on any map, and apparently involves lions. You'll need to learn how to walk like you belong here, she says. You remind her, gently, that you were born here. She nods. But the land hasn't decided if it likes you yet. Greet. She hands you a walking stick, carved with what looks like fangs, tells you to bring water, and starts humming a song in a minor key. 15 minutes later, you're barefoot, ankle deep in dry grass. The sun is melting behind the hills, and she's telling you not to worry about the rustling noises in the bushes. It's just the ancestors, she says. Or a snake, either way, don't run. They both hate that. You want to go home. She keeps walking. Then, without warning, she stops, points ahead, and says, "There." You squint. Nothing but a sun-bleached rock and a single acacia tree, twisted like it made one too many bad life choices. Then you see it. A set of paw prints. Massive, deep, still fresh. "Lion," she says, calm as can be. "But don't panic. He's not here for you." You'd love to believe that. She sits beside the prints and begins tracing their shape with her finger, like reading a book. "Do you know why lions never kill people who are dreaming?" She asks. "No, you do not." "Because dreams are sacred," she says. "And lions, real lions, they can smell what's sacred." You ask if that's a metaphor. She looks at you like you're the metaphor. And then she tells you about Nanyama, the great lion of the spirit plane, a creature so ancient. The ground bends slightly beneath its paws, not out of fear, but respect. "Long ago," she says, "when the first warriors were born from the rivers, they weren't given spears. They were given questions, and the lion was the one who answered them. But only if you didn't run," she adds. Lions hate cowards. It messes with their aesthetic. Historically, Zulu warriors saw lions not just as predators, but as symbols of kingship, bravery, and ancestral power. The word Nanyama itself means both lion and king. Even royal praise poems often compare leaders to lions, tying leadership to strength, but also to restraint. "Anyan can roar," she says, "but to stand silent, when you have the power not to, that's real strength." You stare at the paw prints, then you realize something odd. There are only 3 prints. No back legs. Just a front paw, then another, and then a smaller one beside it. You point it out. She nods. "Sometimes the lions walk with someone who isn't visible," she says. You ask who. She says, "That depends on who you were in your past life." And suddenly this sunset stroll has turned into a reincarnation mystery with very large claws. You sit beside her, and she starts to hum again, low and deep. The grass moves in waves. You ask if she's ever seen a lion up close. She says yes, and that it asked her a question. You blink. "What did it ask?" she says. "It asked if I was ready to stop pretending I wasn't a lion too." You stop breathing for a moment. She smiles like she didn't just say something that deserves a full dramatic pause. Then, casually, she adds, "The historians still debate whether the Zulu lion stories are allegory, dream visions, or real encounters." She scoffs. "They can't decide because they never asked the lions." The wind picks up slightly. The acacia tree creaks. And you swear you hear a low growl. Not threatening, just present. She rises, brushes off her knees. "Come on," she says. "It's getting dark. And this place isn't safe for people who don't know who they are." You scramble up behind her. She doesn't look back. But just before you leave the clearing, she whispers, "Next time you dream of a lion, don't run. Ask it what it remembers about you. And for the first time in your life, you hope you do dream of one." You don't sleep much that night. Not because you are scared of lions. Okay, a little because of that. But mostly because your grandmother said something you can't shake. Ask it what it remembers about you. You didn't even know dreams could remember things. But apparently in your grandmother's world, everything has memory. Even water. Even shadows. Even that one really judgmental chicken that always stares at you from under the porch, like it knows your search history. By dawn, you're tired, a little paranoid, and still haven't figured out if your grandmother was serious. Then, as you sit on the step sipping tea and pretending to be calm, she emerges from her hut carrying a small bundle wrapped in red cloth and muttering to herself. You recognize one word, umkanto, the spear. She unwraps it slowly. It's short, weathered, and probably older than every government you've ever lived under. The blade is dull, but the handle is carved with symbols so precise, you'd think someone used a tattoo needle and infinite patience. "This," she says, "isn't a weapon." You look at her. She holds it up to the light. "This," she continues, "is a question." You ask what kind of question. She grins, the kind that makes answers nervous. You're not sure what that means, but she's already walking again, this time toward the back of the compound, where the land turns rocky and the grass grows in patches like a half-hearted haircut. There, she points to a stone circle, rough, uneven, like someone started building a fence and got distracted for 4 centuries. "This is where your great-grandmother threw her spear into the sky," she says, "and the wind threw it back." "Okay," Now we're doing sky spear sports. You nod slowly. She places the bundle down and begins to tell the story of the Zulu warrior who never fought a battle, but was feared anyway. His name, she says, has been forgotten, or erased, or maybe both. He carried a spear made not of metal, but of river bone and stormwood, a mythical combination that may or may not involve lightning and creative storytelling. He refused to kill. Instead, he would show up at enemy camps, look the enemy general in the eye, and drop his spear at their feet. If they picked it up, they were cursed with understanding. According to legend, every general who held the spear began dreaming of the people they were about to kill. Not metaphorical dreams, very specific ones. A daughter singing, a boy herding goats, a woman laughing while cooking porridge. They stopped fighting, she says. Not because they were weak, but because they suddenly knew who they were about to make disappear. You ask if any of that really happened. She shrugs. History says no, she replies, but the dreams haven't stopped. She hands you the spear. It's lighter than you expect, and it hums. Not out loud, but something in your fingers vibrates like it just tuned into a frequency you didn't know you had. You almost drop it, she says, gently. Every family has a question they're born to carry. She points to the symbols on the shaft. This one's yours. You try to read it. It looks like spirals and footprints, and a snake playing hide and seek with itself. She explains, the first spiral is birth. The next is forgetting. Then a fork in the path, your choice. Then, the same spiral, reversed. That's remembering. You stare. Then you realize something odd. There's no end to the carving. It just keeps looping. She nods, because some questions don't want to be answered. They just want to be respected. Historically speaking, Zulu spears, assegai, were both practical tools of war and symbols of identity. Warriors named their spears. Some were inherited, passed down like family names, carrying with them not just bloodlines, but expectations. But of course, no history book mentions spears that whisper, or dreams that remember, or that one chicken who's still watching you. She wraps the spear again and says, you'll throw yours one day. You ask where. She smiles. The sky, the fire, or your own shadow. Depends on what you're trying to pierce. Then she leans in and whispers, just don't throw it on a Wednesday. The spirits are busy. You blink. She stands. And just before heading back to her hut, she says, scholars still argue whether the spear in this story was real, metaphorical, or a confused weather vane. She waves it off. But I've seen what happens when someone forgets where they placed it. You glance down at your hands. They're still shaking. Not from fear. From something that feels suspiciously like memory. You think today might be a normal day. You really do. The sky's blue. The goats aren't screaming. And your grandmother hasn't said anything remotely cryptic for at least 2 hours. She's just sitting outside, shelling beans into a bowl like any other totally normal, not at all witchy grandmother. But then, of course, she looks up, squints at the clouds and says, looks like a good day to lose a sky. You pause mid, sip of your tea. Lowe's, a what? She doesn't answer immediately, just points to a specific spot in the sky where the blue looks slightly too empty, like something's been erased. Let me tell you about the day someone tried to steal it. You put down your tea. She tells you that once, a long time ago, but not that long ago, a clever young boy decided the sky didn't belong where it was. He said it was wasted real estate, just hanging up there doing nothing but raining on people and giving birds something to poop from. So he made a plan. He built a basket. Your grandmother says, woven from grass that only grows in forgotten fields, lined with feathers that fell from birds that never landed. You ask if that's possible. She raises a brow. Have you tried? Point taken, she continues. The boy waited until a moonless night. He lit no fire. He spoke no words, and he climbed the tallest hill and reached up with his basket. The sky didn't resist. It just sank, gently, like it was curious. And in one movement, he scooped up a piece of it and closed the basket shut. That was the first night the stars blinked out. You ask what happened next. He ran, she says, because the sky doesn't like being moved without warning, according to her. And again, don't ask for citations. The boy hid the basket inside a termite mound, then poured honey over the entrance as an offering. You're not sure if this was symbolic or just confusing. But the sky, she says, has a long memory and a shorter temper. It cracked. Not all of it, just the part he stole. But that was enough. From that day on, she tells you, Every thunderstorm is the sky reaching down, checking to see if anyone still has the basket. That's why we don't leave things open during storms, she says. Not windows, not mouths, not thoughts. You swallow hard. She explains that in old Zulu beliefs, the sky wasn't just a backdrop. It was a living canopy, full of ancestral breath, watching all things. Is Zulu, the very word for sky, is also the root of Zulu, meaning people of the sky. So yes, she says, when we say someone tried to steal the sky, we mean more than just clouds. You ask if the boy got away with it. She smiles. Have you noticed how sometimes just before dawn, the stars flicker, like they're deciding whether to come back? You hadn't, she says. That's the basket, still buried, still leaking sky. You try to process that, then she adds, scholars still argue whether this story was an allegory for drought, ego, or just a clever way to keep kids from poking holes in the ceiling. She chuckles, but they never ask why the same story appears in 5 different villages, or why certain termite mounds hum when it rains. You stare at the termite mound not far from the goat pen. It's quiet. For now. She hands you a piece of cloth and tells you to tie it around your head, so the sky doesn't mistake you for the basket thief's descendant. You ask if you are. She shrugs. It hasn't decided yet. Then casually, she warns. Oh, and if you do find the basket, don't open it on a Wednesday. That's when the clouds are busiest. You almost ask why she keeps using Wednesdays as a warning. She pats your hand. There are 7 days in the week, she says, but only 6 that belong to people. The 7th, that's the sky's day. And just like that, she goes back to shelling beans, like she didn't just imply that the entire atmosphere has a work schedule, and maybe a grudge. You look back up at the sky, still empty, still blue, but somehow, not quite as still as it was before. Today, you're determined not to ask any questions. No philosophical riddles. No follow-ups. No. But what does that mean? Kinds of curiosity. You're just going to keep your head down, help with chores, and avoid eye contact with anything that hums, glows, or moves without legs. It's going really well until your grandmother starts cooking. Specifically, salt. Yes, cooking salt. Not seasoning food with it, not sprinkling it, not even boiling it in water like a soup base. She's roasting it in a pot, muttering to herself and occasionally tossing in what looks suspiciously like crushed leaves, and, unless your eyes deceive you, a single piece of burned string. You try not to ask, but obviously you ask, "What are you doing?" She looks up, deadpan. Salt has to remember who it is. You blink. It forgot. She shrugs. City salt always does. You're about to make a joke about forgetful condiments, but she's already holding up a spoonful of the mixture for you to smell. It's earthy smoky, with a weird bright edge that reminds you of lightning hitting stone. She stirs it again. You know how people think salt just makes things taste better? She asks. It doesn't. It makes things honest. She explains that in Zulu tradition, salt isn't just a flavor. It's a purifier, a boundary, and sometimes a bribe. A bribe? For the ancestors, she says. They'll listen to prayers, but they pay more attention when the words taste seasoned. You laugh, she doesn't. She tells you salt is used in ceremonies to cleanse spaces, protect against restless spirits, and remind food that it has a job to do. A chicken can be dead and boiled, but without salt, it's just shy water. Historically, she's not wrong. In many Bantu-speaking cultures, including the Zulu, salt has long been used for spiritual and practical purposes, preserving meat, warding off bad energy, and as offerings in rituals. It was traded, hoarded, revered, and occasionally blamed when things went wrong. According to your grandmother, that's because salt listens. You ever wonder why it clumps when it rains? She asks. It's huddling. You stare at the pot. She tells you the story of a village where no one could speak the truth. Not because they were lying, but because the air was too clean. So the elders burned salt until the smoke rose in spirals and the words came back heavy. Grounded, salt, she says, is what gives truth its weight. You begin to feel slightly guilty for every French fry you've ever eaten without whispering, "Thank you." She goes on. There was once a woman, she says, who refused to use salt, said it clouded her senses, dulled her instincts. One day, she cooked a pot of porridge, so bland the spirits mistook it for silence. They thought she'd stop talking to them. Your grandmother says, so they stopped talking back. You ask what happened to her. She shrugs. She moved to the city, took up accounting. That tracks. Then she hands you a tiny cloth pouch. Take this, she says. Put it in your pocket. If someone ever lies to you, the salt will clump. You open it. It's not table salt. It's slightly gray, with flecks of what looks like crushed bark, and something that might be a feather, or might be lint. You ask if it actually works. She shrugs. It's been clumping in my pocket since yesterday, and your cousin still hasn't returned my sewing needle. Fair point. Then she gets that look again. The one that means she's about to say something that turns your whole worldview into warm porridge. She leans in. Do you know why salt never spoils? She whispers. You shake your head. Because it already knows what decay tastes like. It just refuses to go back. You stare. She tosses another pinch into the pot, sizzle. Historians still debate whether salt in Zulu culture was just practical or ceremonial, she says. They write articles, they give talks. She snorts, but I've never seen one of them salt the wind before telling a story. You glance down at your tea. It's unsalted. Suddenly you feel unprotected. You reach for the pouch, just in case. The fire crackles, and the salted air smells like something old remembering itself. You've seen a lot of odd things since coming to stay with your grandmother. A talking drum that doesn't talk. A lion print that comes and goes. Salt that decides when people are lying. But tonight is different. Because tonight, the drum beats 3 times. Not out loud. Not from the fire. Not from the hills. From inside the house. Your grandmother hears it too. She freezes mid-sip of tea, lifts her chin and says only one word, shh, which is deeply unhelpful, because you weren't even talking. The room goes still. The shadows seem to pull a little closer. You're suddenly hyper, aware of the way the walls breathe. And then, she moves. She walks to the far side of the hut and lifts a woven mat you didn't even know could be lifted. Beneath it, a shallow hollow in the floor, lined with smooth stones and old ashes. And in the center, a drum, of course, but this one's different. It's small, covered in faded cymbals, tied shut with a strip of goatskin, like someone didn't want it to start drumming again without permission. Don't touch it, she says, in the kind of voice that suggests the last person who did is now part of a cautionary proverb. You ask what it is, she says. It's your aunt. Come again. She doesn't elaborate immediately, just crouches down beside the drum and whispers something in icy Zulu. Too fast for you to catch. Then she looks up. She never left, she says. Not all of her. You sit very, very carefully. She explains that sometimes when someone passes unexpectedly, or with something left unsaid, their presence doesn't go anywhere. It lingers. Not as a ghost, not as a memory. As rhythm, she says, as heartbeat. According to Zulu belief, the spirits of the departed, the Amadlozi, stay connected to the family, not in spooky horror movie ways, but in everyday life. A voice in your dream, a whisper in the wind, a misplaced spoon that means you're being watched, and not by the chicken this time. This drum, it's not just symbolic. She was a singer, your grandmother explains. Always tapping her fingers, always humming, even during funerals. You believe it. You also now believe she might still be humming. Your grandmother tells you there's an old tradition, lost now, where family members of the departed would keep an item close to the body for 7 days. A necklace, a bowl, or, in rare cases, an instrument. Then they'd place that item in a quiet space, so the person could still speak, she says, when no one else had the right words. You ask why 3 drum beats. She looks at you like the answer is obvious. One for the body, one for the voice, one for the part of her that couldn't let go. The room is quiet again. Then she tells you the strange part. She didn't place the drum there. Your aunt did. The night before she died. She said someone told her to. Your grandmother said she dreamed of a girl with your face, only older, asking where the rhythm had gone. You stare. This is either a touching spiritual moment or a very elaborate guilt trip involving reincarnation. You are still not sure which. Then your grandmother says something that actually chills you. Sometimes the drum taps back. You ask what that means. She just smiles. She says there's a reason she keeps the drum tied shut, not to trap something in, but to make sure the rhythm doesn't go where it's not needed. Music, she says, isn't always about joy. Sometimes it's just the past knocking politely. She takes a piece of salted cloth, of course it's salted, and gently covers the drum again. Then she adds, historians still debate whether Zulu drums were sacred or secular, community instruments, or ancestral microphones. She shakes her head. They forget. It's not who made the drum, it's who it's still listening to. You look down at the floor. no sound, no movement. But you get the oddest feeling, like something just whispered your name in rhythm. Just once, softly, from inside the drum. The next morning, you find your grandmother talking to a rock, not a metaphorical rock. An actual, large, unblinking, deeply uninterested rock sitting behind the hut like it's been there since the beginning of time and has absolutely no plans to leave. You freeze. She waves you over. Come say hello. You hesitate. You look at the rock. The rock looks like a rock. She taps it with her palm and says softly, "This one remembers you." Of course it does. You sit beside her, mostly because leaving would require explaining that you are afraid of sediment. She smiles, pats the ground beside her, and begins. There are 3 kinds of rocks in the world. She says, the ones that hold the land together, the ones that hold heat, and the ones that hold secrets. She nudges this one. This one's all 3. The rock apparently has a name. She won't tell you what it is, only that if you say it, you should mean it. And not with your voice, with your back. You try to understand that metaphor. You fail. She continues. When she was your age, she says, the rock was taller, either because she was shorter, or because the earth's spine was stronger then. She used to sit here with her cousins and tell stories. The kind of stories you had to whisper, so the wind wouldn't steal them. One day, she says, a boy told a story that didn't belong to him. He stole it from his uncle's prayer. And the rock, she says, rolled. You blink. It what now? Just once, she says. Just enough. That boy didn't come back the next day, or the next. He didn't die or vanish. He just started forgetting words, first names, then places. Then how to walk home without counting steps. Because stories have roots, she says. And if you rip one out without asking, the ground notices. You ask if she's joking. She doesn't answer. Instead, she traces a finger along a long crack running through the middle of the stone. This split wasn't here before that day, she says. It opened after he left. You look closer. The crack is thin but deep. Like someone took a blade and sliced history open. She tells you that in many old Zulu villages, large stones weren't just obstacles or furniture, they were witnesses. People believed stones listened. Some were used in rituals. Some were sat on by elders when decisions had to be made. Some were never to be touched. This one, it listens. Sometimes too well. That's why we don't tell lies near it, she says. Even kind ones. She pauses. Then tells you about a man who tried to sell this land decades ago. Said it was empty. Said there were no graves. Said nothing important had ever happened here. The next morning the stone was in his bed. You laugh. She doesn't. To this day, she says. No one knows how it got there, or how he moved it back. But after that, he never sold anything again. Took up basket weaving, named each one after an apology. You ask what the rock remembers about you. She shrugs. It hasn't told me, but it let you sit. Then, she leans in and says, the scholars still argue whether rocks in African traditions were sacred, or just symbolic. If they stored energy, or if that's just poetic thinking. She places her palm back on the stone. But none of them ever asked the stone. You rest your hand on the warm sun-baked surface. Nothing happens. But you don't want to speak too loud. Not here, not with something listening that remembers what your voice sounds like from the inside out. You and your grandmother sit in silence. The wind stirs. A bird cries once. Like punctuation. And somewhere deep in the stone, you swear you feel not a movement, not a tremor, just a tiny space, opening, waiting. You are starting to suspect your grandmother doesn't sleep. Or if she does it with one eye open and one foot already laced into a sandal, ready to chase off spirits, snakes, or unsolicited visitors from other realms. Tonight confirms your theory. You're half asleep, swaddled in your blanket like a human burrito, when she knocks gently on your door with her knuckles. No urgency. Just inevitability. It's time, she says. You open one eye. For what? She smiles like, that's a silly question. To meet the person who lives inside your name. Nope. Too early for riddles. But you're already sitting up. Because when your grandmother says things like that, they're never metaphors. They're logistics. She leads you into the night, barefoot. The stars overhead are brighter than usual, so many they almost crowd the sky, like distant ancestors jostling for a better view. You walk until you reach a small clearing surrounded by crooked trees. In the center sits an old clay pot sealed with wax and wrapped in layers of twine. You ask what's in it. She says, your echo. Perfect. You kneel beside it. She kneels too. She tells you that in Zulu tradition a name is not just a label, it's a path, a tool, and a house. Every name carries echoes of those who held it before, and hints of what might come after. That's why naming ceremonies are so careful. It's not about what sounds pretty, it's about what fits. She tells you your name was chosen in a dream, not hers. Yours. You were 3 days old, barely capable of sneezing, let alone storytelling. But apparently, you twitched once in your sleep and let out a sound that matched an ancestor's favorite word. They took that as a sign. You ask who that ancestor was. She taps the pot. Let's find out. She lights a small bundle of dried herbs, aromatic sharp, with a hint of cinnamon and something bitter, and fans the smoke around the pot. Then, she hums. Not a song. More like a key trying to unlock a forgotten door. Slowly, she begins to untie the twine. You ask if something's going to jump out. She chuckles. Only if you're lying to yourself. When the pot opens, nothing happens at first, just silence. But then you feel it, a sudden shift in air pressure, like someone walked into the room without opening a door. The back of your neck prickles. Your grandmother whispers something too softly to hear. Then she says, "Ask it." You don't know what to say, so you ask, awkwardly, "What do you remember about me?" The wind stirs, the fire flickers, and from inside the pot, softly, barely audible, you hear a single word. It's your name. But not quite. It's said differently, with weight, with history, with a laugh tucked in the middle and a sigh at the end. It's your name the way it sounds when spoken by someone who knew the first version of you, the you that hadn't been born yet. Your grandmother nods. They always pronounce it that way, she says, with memory. You sit back. She tells you that names were once so powerful. Some people had 3. One for family, one for the ancestors, and one that was never spoken aloud, only thought. To keep it safe. Yours, she won't tell you how many you have. That's between you and the echo. You glance at the pot, still quiet, still open. She says, sometimes it takes years to hear the whole thing. You ask if hers ever spoke. She smiles, a little sad. It did, but I wasn't ready. Then she leans closer, folds the cloth back over the pot and whispers. Sleep now, as she ties the last knot, she adds. Linguists still debate whether African naming traditions were spiritual or socio-cultural, whether the names shaped the person or merely reflected the time. She shrugs. But a name that echoes back isn't just a label. It's proof someone's still listening. You walk home in silence, except for the soft sound of your name, still hanging in the night air, like it's trying to find a place to land. This morning, you are the first one up, which feels wrong. The sun is barely over the hills. The dew is still clinging to the grass, like it has commitment issues, and the world is quiet in that awkward way, like it doesn't realize you're awake yet. You step outside expecting to see your grandmother already grinding herbs or whispering to lizards, but nothing. No sign of her. You call out once. Then again, still nothing. So you do what any sensible person would do, panic quietly, and eat a piece of fruit to build emotional strength. And then you hear it, a low clink, metal on stone. You follow the sound to the far edge of the property, where the earth turns red and dusty, and the plants grow sharp and unfriendly. She's kneeling there, completely calm, holding what looks like a mirror. Only it's not a mirror, it's too old. The frame is made of dark wood, chipped and scorched at one corner. The surface doesn't reflect. It swirls. Sit, she says without looking up. You sit. She places the object between you. This is the mirror that doesn't show your face. Perfect, just what you needed. An existential riddle before breakfast. You look closer. Instead of your reflection, the surface shows a ripple, like a pond disturbed by footsteps you didn't take. Faint flashes appear, feet running, hands building, eyes watching, none of them yours, or not yet. This, she says, shows what your shadow remembers when you forget. You're not even going to pretend to understand that. She tells you that in ancient Zulu practices, long before the missionaries, long before the borders, people believed there were parts of the self that didn't live in the skin. They lived alongside you, in shadow, in smell, in the way the wind curled around your wrist when you made a hard decision. These parts could remember things you'd buried, shames, wishes, past lives, future warnings, and sometimes, if you were brave enough, you could ask them to remind you. You ask if that's what the mirror is doing. She nods. Careful though, she says. It doesn't show what you want. It shows what you're becoming. You hesitate, then ask, is that always a good thing? She chuckles. That depends on whether you've been lying to yourself lately. You stare into the swirling surface. For a moment, you see nothing. Then, faintly, you see you. Not the now. You, an older you. Standing in front of people, speaking, but your mouth doesn't move. The sound comes from somewhere else, like your voice has learned to travel without you. You look stronger, but lonelier. Then it shifts. You're smaller. In a crowd, everyone's dancing, but you're holding something tightly. Something no one else seems to see. Then it's gone. Just missed. You pull back. Your heart's racing. She watches you. You have to be kind to the person you're becoming, she says. They're still figuring out what parts of you are worth keeping. Then she leans closer, runs a hand gently over the frame. This mirror belonged to your great-grandfather. He carved it from a tree that had been struck by lightning twice. Said it could hold memories the brain didn't want to store. You ask if it ever scared him, she says. Only when he stopped looking into it. Then she says something you've come to recognize as the signature line of these moments. Historians still debate whether Zulu mirror rituals ever truly existed, or if they were metaphors passed down through song. She grins, but the stories are always careful not to look into the metaphor too closely. She lifts the mirror again, wraps it in cloth, places it back into a carved box that smells like camphor and quiet thoughts. Then she says, "You don't have to understand the future. You just have to introduce yourself to it." Politely. And with that, she stands and walks away, leaving you sitting beside a patch of shadow that now looks just a little too familiar. You glance down, and for just 1 second, your shadow doesn't move quite in sync with you. The chickens are missing. All of them. Every last squawking, feather, fluffing, chaos, generating bird is gone. You didn't notice at first, mainly because you were still recovering from yesterday's identity crisis with a mirror. But now the coop is silent. Eerily so, like even the mosquitoes are whispering. You find your grandmother in the kitchen, humming, stirring something smoky in a pot. You inform her of the poultry vanishing. She nods. Calm, too calm. "Oh," she says. "It's the river." "The what now?" "The river borrowed them," she adds. You're not sure what to say to that. You've heard of foxes stealing chickens, not natural bodies of water with a borrowing policy. She wipes her hands and leads you out of the hut, past the usual thorn bushes, past the goat pen, to a narrow path that curls downward into a dense grove of trees. There, tucked between reeds and mud, is a river you've never seen before, which is strange, because you've walked this land a lot. And rivers don't just casually appear, but here it is, wide, slow, moving, shimmering like it's been waiting for centuries. And there, floating lazily on a raft, made of tangled roots and soggy feathers, are the chickens, completely fine, not panicking, not clucking, just vibing. They needed to forget who they were, your grandmother says, as if that explains everything. You blink. She goes on. In old Zulu traditions, she says, rivers aren't just water. They are boundaries between things, life and death, past and present, seen and unseen. They are the keepers of forgetting. If you throw something into a river, she explains, it won't drown, it will unbecome. It will loosen, reform, start over. So sometimes, if something is carrying too much, sorrow, memory, ego, it goes to the river to shed. You ask if chickens have trauma. She looks at you. Have you met chickens? Touch Faye. Then she leans in and whispers. The river knows when someone needs a break from their shape. You stare at the raft. One chicken dips its head into the water like it's being baptized in confusion. You ask if people do this too. She nods. You were taken to this river once, as a baby, when you wouldn't stop crying. You raise a brow. It didn't make you quieter, she admits, but it changed the kind of crying. She won't explain what that means. Of course she won't. She just points to the edge of the water and says, give it something. You look around. You pick a pebble. She shakes her head. Number, give it something you don't want to carry home. You think for a second. You reach into your pocket and pull out the pouch of salt. It's clumped. You toss it gently into the water. It sinks slowly, trailing silence. Then, you feel it. Not relief exactly, more like a small loosening in your ribs, like a knot relaxing. Your grandmother nods approvingly. You can borrow forgetting, she says. Just don't abuse it. The river always sends the memory back, but slower, softer. She explains that in many regions, rivers were used as ceremonial spaces, not just for cleansing but for resetting. When someone returned from battle, or birth, or heartbreak, they'd go to the water and whisper what they didn't have the courage to say out loud. And the river, she says, never repeats secrets, only absorbs them. Then she adds, historians still argue whether these river rites were literal or symbolic, but ask anyone who's wept at a shoreline, they'll tell you the water listened. You glance at the chickens again, they're clucking now. One of them sneezes. The river nudges their raft gently toward shore. Borrowing period over. You walk back home with a strange lightness in your step. And a small, persistent question in your chest. What else have I been carrying that wasn't mine? By now, you've stopped asking if things can get weirder. The answer is always yes. Today, your grandmother hands you a spoon and tells you to dig a hole. Not for a plant, not for compost. For a whisper. You stare at the spoon, then at her. She stares right back, utterly serious. So here you are, on your knees in the back garden, carving a palm-sized hole into the dirt, like someone reenacting a very slow and emotional scene from a farming documentary. When the hole is about the depth of your fist, she nods. Good, she says. Now speak into it. You blink. She's holding a little scrap of cloth, wrapped in dried herbs, stitched with thread that looks older than your sneakers. She drops it gently into your palm. This carries a whisper, she says. Say what you want it to forget. You pause, like a secret. She shrugs. Could be a fear. Could be that thing you said yesterday that still makes you cringe every 5 minutes. Relatable. So you lean in, and quietly, you whisper into the bundle. Not even a sentence, just a feeling. And you drop it into the hole. Your grandmother covers it with soil, presses the earth flat, and then places a single white stone on top. That's it, she says. Now it's sleeping. You wait for more. Maybe thunder, maybe a ghost rising to thank you for your vulnerability. But there's only breeze, and birds, and silence. She stands and brushes off her hands. The ground remembers what we're not ready to. You walk with her back to the hut, already formulating at least 4 questions and a philosophical debate. But before you can ask anything, she says, people always think they have to fix their thoughts. But some thoughts aren't broken, they're just tired. She pours tea, sits, continues like she didn't just make you bury part of your soul next to the squash patch. She tells you that in Zulu tradition, the land isn't just a surface. It's a library, one that stores more than footprints. Grief is planted, joy is harvested, and some memories grow like roots you never see until they trip you. That's why there's a custom in some villages of burying whisper bundles, infilo, as offerings, not to hide things, but to ask the ground to help hold them. Because the earth, after all, doesn't forget. But it also doesn't judge, just holds. You sip your tea, trying to picture the world as a giant emotional hard drive. Then she tells you about the time your uncle tried to bury a lie, a real one. He whispered something untrue into a bundle, trying to trick the earth into keeping it for him. A week later, his toenails started falling off. Coincidence, maybe. But he never lied to the soil again. You ask how long your whisper will stay underground. As long as it needs to, she says. Sometimes the earth gives it back, softer, wiser, less sharp. You ask if she's ever dug one up. She hesitates, then admits, once. When I forgot who I was, she says. I needed to remember the hard way. She doesn't explain further, just refills your cup and adds. Anthropologists still argue whether these burial rituals were symbolic coping methods or spiritual acts, whether the healing was internal or external. She stirs her tea. But none of them ever asked what happens after the whisper sleeps. You look out toward the garden, toward the white stone, and for a second, you swear the breeze shifts ever so slightly around that patch of soil, like the earth just exhaled. Today starts with a sneeze. Not yours. The fire sneezes. You didn't know that was possible, but there it is. A small, sharp whoosh, followed by a puff of ash that leaps out of the hearth and lands directly on your left sock. Your grandmother doesn't flinch. That's the smoke's way of saying good morning, she says, as if that clears everything up. You peel off your sock. Is the fire allergic to me? She laughs. Number just impatient. She grabs a tin bowl and hands it to you. We're making ash tea. You stare at the soot-covered spoon. This feels like a prank. She gestures to the fire again. Not all fire is for burning. Some is for remembering. Sure enough, there's a blackened pot hanging above the coals, and inside is, well, something between broth, memory, and regret. It smells woody, bitter, faintly sweet, like burnt sugar with secrets. You ask what's in it, she says. the leftover thoughts of yesterday. Cool. That clears nothing up. She explains that in Zulu tradition, and many other African cultures, ash isn't waste. It's a record. A byproduct of transformation. Fire changes things. Yes. But it doesn't erase them. It condenses them. Makes them smaller. Simpler. Honest, ash tea, she says, is made from wood that mattered. Not just any wood. Specifically, branches from trees that grew near important places. An old meeting circle. A healing hut. A birth tree. Burned slowly, whispered over. Stirred with patience. You watch her scoop a small portion into 2 cups. It's gray. You try not to judge. She hands you one. To clarity, she says. You sip. It tastes like warmth that used to be a forest. There's a smoky depth to it. A bitterness that somehow feels encouraging. Like the flavor version of a wise elder saying, that was dumb, but you'll survive. Your grandmother sits. She tells you about a time when elders would drink ash tea before making difficult decisions, especially ones that required remembering pain. Because sometimes, clarity doesn't come from fresh water. It comes from what survived the burning. Fire cleans, she says, but ash teaches. She explains that ash was also used in ceremonies to mark foreheads during grief, to protect the threshold of homes, and, if the fire was strong enough, to mix into paint for storytelling on rocks. You look down at your cup, wonder if you're now full of half a tree and a few ancient secrets. She seems to read your thoughts. Don't worry, she says. The ashes only remember what they're ready to share. Then, because it's becoming tradition now, she drops the final twist. Some scholars still claim the Zulu use of ash in rituals was purely practical, just available material. But they forget ash is only born when something matters enough to burn. She finishes her tea in one long sip, then swirls the last bit in the bottom of the cup. The residue forms a pattern. Spiral, then slash. Then dot. She stares at it. Nods, pours it into the fire. You ask what it meant. She shrugs. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. The ash doesn't always translate well. You sit with that for a while. Ash tea warming your belly. The fire cracking. Soot settling. The smell of memory floating just above the smoke. And you wonder, what have you burned lately? And what's trying to speak from the ashes? You wake to laughter. Not your grandmother's. This one is unfamiliar, younger. Crisp like wind snapping through laundry. It echoes for just a second, and then it's gone. So fast you wonder if you imagined it. But your grandmother's already up. Already outside. Already talking to someone you can't quite see. You shuffle out, still half dreaming, and find her crouched beside the scarecrow. Except now the scarecrow looks different. It's wearing a new shirt, a necklace, and someone has painted eyes on it, sharp ones. Not the usual cartoonish blobs. These eyes look like they're watching you. You stop walking. She waves you forward. Come greet your cousin. Excuse me. You take a hesitant step closer. The scarecrow stands in the middle of the field like it always has. Arms outstretched, head lolling slightly to the left. Only now, it feels present. Like it's listening. Like it might respond. His name is Sifo, your grandmother says. He's been waiting for someone to remember his story. You ask how a scarecrow can have a story. She grins. That's what the crows said too, until he started telling it. Of course. Crows. She tells you that in Zulu folklore, scarecrows aren't just for scaring birds. They're for marking promises. When someone dies with a vow unfulfilled, their spirit can't always move on. So their family plants a version of them, woven from cloth, twine, old clothes, and memory, to remind the world of what was left undone. The crows, apparently, are the messengers. If they perch without pecking, she says, that means the spirit's still speaking. You look at the scarecrow again. A single black feather sits at its feet. She tells you Sifo was a storyteller. Too loud, too proud. Never finished his last tale. Swore he'd return to tell the ending. He didn't. Not completely. So now, each year, she adds something to the scarecrow, a sleeve from his favorite shirt, a bead from his drumstick, a line from one of his half-finished fables carved into the wood. You're the first to see the eyes, she says. That means he wants to finish something. You swallow. You weren't planning on ghostwriting for haunted straw relatives, but here we are. You ask how you're supposed to help. She hands you a worn notebook. The pages are yellowed. Some ink has bled through. But halfway down the first page, there's a sentence that stops abruptly. There once was a boy who could hear the names of birds. And nothing else, she says. Sifo used to swear that birds don't just chirp. They speak. And not just to each other. To people. If you listened right, they'd call you by the parts of yourself you'd forgotten. He believed every bird was a truth with wings, she says. And his last story was going to explain how to hear them. You look down at the page, then at the scarecrow. The wind shifts. Somewhere, a bird calls. It almost sounds like a question. You suddenly feel very, very watched. Your grandmother pats your shoulder. Don't worry, she says. He won't leave until you're done. You glance at the scarecrow. It tilts slightly in the breeze, or maybe nods. Then she adds, folklorists still debate whether scarecrows in Zulu tradition were symbolic placeholders or spiritual vessels, whether the stories tied to them were myth or memory. She adjusts the scarf around her shoulders. But birds remember what we forget. And with that, she walks away, leaving you standing in a field, notebook in hand, a feather at your feet, and a half-finished story that may or may not be looking back at you. Tonight, the hut smells like thunder. Not the rain, not the mud, the thunder. You step inside and immediately feel it. Static in your hair, in your fingertips, like the air is on the edge of remembering something. It's not supposed to say out loud. Your grandmother is waiting, cross-legged on a woven mat, in front of a strange bundle wrapped in copper wire and animal hide. She pats the space next to her. You're going to learn how to trap lightning. You pause in the doorway politely. Because you're pretty sure that's illegal in most countries. She unwraps the bundle. Inside is a long, narrow object, somewhere between a staff, a flute, and an antenna. It hums, not loudly, but persistently, like it's tuned to a frequency that your bones aren't sure they should be hearing. This is an umkanto wezulu, she says. You repeat the words awkwardly. She smiles. It means spear of the sky. Cool. So now we're doing weather magic. Greet. She explains that this is no ordinary artifact. In Zulu mythology, there were certain people, dreamers, drummers, storm chasers, who were said to have the gift of hearing the sky's anger. Not just thunder, but the feelings behind it. When lightning struck the earth, they believed it wasn't random. It was a message, sometimes a warning, sometimes a name, and occasionally, a summons. Your grandmother says this spear was left behind by one of those listeners. It only hums when the storm remembers you. No pressure. You ask if you are supposed to do anything with it. She nods. You sleep beside it tonight. Ah, of course. Nothing says restful sleep like spooning a lightning rod. She adds, don't worry, it won't strike. Not unless you lie. Good to know. That night, you lie beside it on your mat, eyes wide, sleep avoiding you like you owe it money. The hum deepens, not louder. Just closer. You swear you can feel your heartbeat sinking with it. And then, just before dawn, you dream. You're running. Barefoot, across wet soil. The sky is silver. You see flashes ahead, not dangerous, beckoning. Each strike lands not in chaos, but in patterns. Circles. Lines, one that looks like a bird, another like a hand reaching down. You stop running, and the thunder speaks. Not with words. With reminders. Flashes of things you haven't done yet. Apologies you still owe. Dreams you buried too early. Then, just as quickly, it fades. You wake with the spear humming louder than before. Your grandmother sits beside you. You listened, she says. Not everyone does. You ask if that was just a dream. She hands you a piece of paper. On it is a symbol, one you saw in your dream, drawn in ash, already fading. She tells you that in certain ceremonies, these symbols were burned into memory, not skin. They were meant to remind the dreamer of their unfinished oaths, oaths they didn't even know they made. Then she adds, modern historians say the spear of the sky was probably a metaphor for ambition, that no one ever trapped lightning, that it's all just poetic exaggeration. She looks out the window, but the thunder still comes when we say certain names. She stands, the spear quiet now, the static gone, but in your chest, something still sparks, small and stubborn, like the storm left behind a seed waiting. You wake up to silence, which, around here, is suspicious. It's the kind of silence that feels too clean, like someone wiped the sound off the air with a cloth. No chickens, no wind, not even the usual creaky sighs from the floorboards. You tiptoe outside, and that's when you see it. Your grandmother is standing in the field, alone. Still in front of a circle of stones, 12, to be exact, perfectly spaced, none of which you remember seeing yesterday, which is weird because you were out here chasing spirit, Scarecrow drama not even 24 hours ago. She motions you over with a tilt of her head. This, she says as you arrive, is a listening ring. You glance around, nothing in particular stands out. Just old stones, dusty, uneven. Until she says, sit, don't speak. You sit, don't speak, and you start to hear it. Not voices, not words, but a rhythm, a pattern. The breeze shifts every few seconds, brushing past one stone, then the next, in a way that feels deliberate, like the air is telling a story using punctuation. After a few minutes, your grandmother finally speaks. Each of these stones is tuned to a person. You squint. To a what? She points at the first stone. This one is your great aunt. She used to hum when she stirred porridge. The stone remembered. Then the next. That one's your grandfather. He never said much, but when he did, the ground shook a little. She moves on. This one is your cousin. Only lived a week, but laughed on day 2. The breeze remembers. You look around. 12 stones. 12 ghosts of sound. 12 lives echoing through nothing. It's like a stone-based Spotify playlist of your lineage. You ask what yours would sound like. She says, we don't know yet. That's why your stone hasn't arrived. You go quiet again, and now, you start to notice the differences. Some stones vibrate ever so slightly when the wind hits. Others stay still, letting the silence fill in what they've already said. She tells you that in Zulu oral tradition, people didn't write their stories down. They inscribed them into the land, into the way they walked, the way they sang, the way they boiled water with one hand instead of 2. Places absorbed personality. And sometimes, held it. These listening rings were used not just to mourn, but to remember how someone sounded when they were alive. Not their voice, their presence. When someone dies, she says, we plant them twice, once in the soil, once in the air around their stone. You ask how you're supposed to know if you're listening right. She smiles. If the stone ever sighs back at you, you'll know. Then, as always, she slips in that one phrase you've come to expect. Archaeologists are still uncertain whether these stone rings had spiritual function or acoustic design. Some say they were ritual spaces, others claim they were early forms of environmental architecture. She shrugs. But ask any child who's sat in one, they'll tell you which relative makes the wind whistle. You sit there a while longer, letting the air pass through you, counting the beats, the silences, the places where meaning hides behind pause. And just as you're about to leave, one stone gives off a faint, low hum. Barely audible, but there. You turn to your grandmother. She's already smiling. This morning, the sky is wearing its dramatic cloak. Thick clouds, heavy light. The kind of weather that feels like a prelude to something important, either a storm or a revelation. Your grandmother calls you over before breakfast and hands you a long, narrow box made of bone and bark. This, she says, is your inheritance. You raise an eyebrow. Is it money? She shakes her head. It's heavier than that. You open it slowly. Inside, a bundle of dried leaves, a tiny flute carved from antelope horn, a broken piece of pottery, and a folded piece of cloth, stained with something like ink, or blood, hard to tell. You stare at it. She nods. It's a memory kit. You wait. She waits. The sky waits. You cave first. A what? She gestures for you to sit. She explains. In certain Zulu households, especially among keepers of stories or healers, elders would assemble memory kits for their descendants. Not with photos or written words, but with textures, scents, and fragments. Because memory isn't just about facts, it's about feeling something real. You pick up the flute. She says, your great grandmother played that every evening, right before the chickens went quiet. You bring it to your lips, no sound. She smiles. She used it to listen, not to play. You're starting to think half your ancestors had secret lives as wizards. Next, the cloth. This, she says, was wrapped around your uncle's wrist the day he ran away, and then came back. You ask what the stain is. She says, it's either mulberry ink or goat blood. History isn't always sure. Then the pottery shard. Found at the base of a termite mound, the story says it belonged to a child who traded it for a wish. We don't know if the wish worked. You ask why it's in your kit. She replies, because the wish was for someone like you. No pressure. Finally, she picks up the leaves, crushes them gently between her fingers. A scent wafts up. Sharp, smoky, citrusy, unfamiliar. She closes her eyes. That, she says, is what the air smelled like the night you were born. You're quiet. She lets the silence linger, then says, modern historians argue about the use of these kits. Some say they're ritualistic teaching tools. Others believe they're just symbolic heirlooms with no consistent purpose. She runs her finger along the box's edge, but none of them ask why the box only closes after the person has added something of their own. You glance at the items. At the space in the corner, empty, waiting. You ask what you are supposed to put there. She shrugs. Something you'll forget unless you leave it behind. You think for a long time. Finally, you reach into your pocket, pull out the feather from the scarecrow field, place it inside. The box clicks shut, not locked, just satisfied. Your grandmother takes it gently, wraps it in cloth, and stores it in the rafters. It's not for you anymore. It's for whoever's coming next. And as you walk away, you realize something strange. You don't miss the feather. Not because it's gone, but because it already belongs somewhere else. Tonight, you don't sleep in the hut. You sleep under the stars, not because you want to, because your grandmother says. Tonight the roof might get in the way. You consider asking what exactly it would get in the way of. But by now you've learned it's faster to go along and let the weirdness explain itself. So you're out on a woven mat wrapped in a blanket that smells like sage and firewood, staring up at the vast inky sky. She lies down beside you, hands behind her head like this is a regular Tuesday activity. The sky remembers you, she says. You glance up, it's full, 1,000 stars blinking like ancient emails waiting to be read. She continues, in Zulu traditions, stars weren't just lights, they were watchers, relatives, sometimes gods, sometimes ancestors too proud to come back down. You ask if that means you're being watched. She shrugs. Only when you're worth watching. Fair. She points out one star, bright and low. That's the one that shows up when someone's about to make a choice. Then another, slightly to the left. That one remembers grief, but doesn't hold it against you. And just above your head, that one, that's the trickster. It moves when you blink. You try blinking. It moves. Or maybe your eyes do. Either way, she grins like she knew it would mess with you. She tells you that once, when she was your age, she got lost in the mountains during a rainstorm. Couldn't see the path. Couldn't feel her feet. But then a break in the clouds showed her a single star, and she followed it all the way home. You sure that wasn't just luck? You ask. Maybe, she says. But I thank the star anyway. She goes on to explain that stargazing wasn't always about navigation. Sometimes, it was for diagnosis. When a child fell ill, elders would consult the sky. Certain stars burned redder, or closer, or vanished altogether. That told them what herbs to brew, what songs to sing. The sky, she says, is like a family member who never left, always overhead, always opinionated. Even when we don't look up, she adds, it doesn't stop looking down. She gestures to a pattern in the stars. Do you see that shape? You squint? Kind of. She traces it with her finger in the air. A curve, then 2 points, then a long tail. That, she says, is the lion who forgot he was brave. You smile. Did he remember? No. She replies. But he walked forward anyway. And for a moment the stars feel closer. Like they heard that and nodded. Then, as expected, she drops the scholarly mystery. Astronomers argue whether indigenous constellations had formal systems, or were more fluid based on storytelling. Some say they were merely mnemonic devices. Others believe they were emotional maps. She reaches into a pouch beside her and sprinkles something into the fire. A mix of herbs and crushed shells. A soft greenish smoke rises. The stars like scent, she explains. It reminds them what breath feels like. And just before sleep catches you, she says something so quiet, you almost dream it. They say if you sleep under the right star, it'll show you a version of yourself that's already forgiven everything. You drift off wondering which star is yours, and whether it's still waiting for you to notice it. You're packing, but not like you're leaving forever, more like you're returning to somewhere you didn't realize you'd already been. Your grandmother gives you a satchel, soft leather, feels like it's held more than bread and beads in its lifetime. Inside, a small stone from the listening ring, a pinch of ash from the fire, a folded cloth that still smells like the whisper you buried, and the tiniest sliver of metal from Sipho's scarecrow ribcage. Don't ask me how that got there, she says. Just don't lose it. You sling it over your shoulder, and for a moment it's heavier than it should be. Like every memory is dense, settled. She walks with you to the edge of the village. The trees part slightly ahead. There's a path you hadn't noticed before. Classic move. Really. I'm not supposed to say goodbye. She tells you. Not yet. This is just a long inhale. You nod, not trusting your voice. Then, as always, a lesson. In Zulu philosophy, we believe in the eternal return. Nothing ends. It just loops differently. Sometimes you leave to remember. Sometimes you stay to forget. You're about to step onto the path when she holds out her hand. Wait, she digs into her pocket and pulls out a spoon. You blink. Like, the one I used to dig the whisper hole? No, she says. This one's older. She turns it over. There's a groove worn into the back, like someone used it to press into the earth many times. It belonged to the first person in our line who chose to remember out loud. You take it. It's warm. Somehow, then she adds, ethnographers still debate whether objects like this had real ritual value or were simply household items later imbued with meaning. But they always forget. Meaning comes later. That's the whole point. She gives your shoulder a squeeze. You're carrying more than what's in that bag, she says. But don't worry. Some memories walk beside you. Others go ahead and clear the path. You ask when you'll be back. She just smiles. When the wind misses you, you turn toward the path. It shimmers slightly in the morning light, like it's been waiting, like it's been watching. And as your feet crunch the leaves, you don't feel like you're leaving. You feel like you're being written into something, like a sentence that finally found its voice. Behind you, the village exhales, the scarecrow nods, the river rustles. A single star fades in the sky, right on cue. The path behind you is quiet now, but not empty. It hums with everything you've left, soft memories, breath, warm stories, laughter that found a home in silence, the whisper you buried, the stars you named, the fire that once tasted your thoughts. And though your feet are still moving, something inside you is finally still. You don't need to look back. You carry the village in the way you breathe now, in the rhythm of your steps, in the space between your thoughts, where old wisdom curls up like a cat and falls asleep, purring softly. You've walked through fields where the dead speak, slept beside a spear that listens to dreams, and sipped ash from trees that remember. And somehow, none of it feels strange anymore. It feels natural, like you've always known the world was bigger than it seemed. Just needed a grandmother to remind you. So as the light fades, and your eyes get heavy, you feel your own story begin to settle. Not ending, just slowing, stretching itself out across your chest like a warm blanket. Because tonight, you've arrived at a place where the stars breathe in time with your heartbeat, where the wind knows your name but whispers it gently, where your thoughts no longer chase sleep. They welcome it, and as your breath deepens, you feel one final truth: you're not alone. You never were, and now, finally, you can rest.